Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Institute of Chinese Studies, I welcome you all to the 2025 Gargi and VP Dutt Memorial Lecture. The ICS community holds the Gargi and VP Dutt Memorial Lecture in the memory of Professor Gargi and Professor VP Dutt, who were pioneers and steadfast promoters of Chinese studies in India. This lecture series has been institutionalized through the generous support of the Gargi and VP Dutt Foundation. We would also thank Ms. Anuradha Dutt, the daughter of the professors Dutt and the managing trustee of the Gargi and Vidya Prakash Foundation, for sponsoring this lecture. Now, we extend a warm welcome to Professor Kirill Babaev. He is our distinguished speaker for the event. He has been the director of the Institute of China and Contemporary Asia of the Russian Academy of Sciences since 2021. He is considered a leading expert on the Asia-Pacific region. He chairs the Russian National Committee of the Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia-Pacific and is the deputy chairman of the Presidium of the Scientific Council of the BRICS National Research Committee. In 2023, he was elected president of the National Coordination Center for International Business Cooperation. He has experience in both academia and business. He also occupies the position of the first vice president of the Alpha Group Consortium. He also holds degrees in financial management, public administration, history of arts, and Oriental studies. Holding a PhD in philology and a Doctor of Sciences in Philology, he is also professor at the Financial University under the government of the Russian Federation. His scholarly output includes numerous books and articles on international relations, linguistics, ethnography, and Oriental studies. He is proficient in 13 foreign languages. His co-authored book, Pivot to the East, Russia and East Asian Vector 2014 to 2024 was published this summer in summer of 2024. Professor Kirill Babaev will deliver the lecture on the theme of Russia, India, and China, problems and prospects of building Greater Eurasia. Today's lecture will be chaired by Professor Manoranjan Mohanty, who is a distinguished professor at the Council for Social Development, New Delhi. He is a social scientist, China scholar, and a peace and human rights activist with a research interest in the study of political economy of China, India, and global transformation. He is an emeritus fellow of the Institute of Chinese Studies, its founding member, and former chairperson. He has authored, among others, Ideology Matters, China from Mao Zedong to Xi Jinping, China's Transformation, The Success Story and the Success Trap. He has been part of several national and international research projects and academic initiatives which have led to research papers and edited and co-authored volumes such as Exploring Emerging Global Thresholds Towards 2030, China at Turning Point, Perspectives After the 19th Party Congress. Before I hand it over to Dr. Arvind Yelleri, who is an honorary fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, I would like to request all the participants to keep their phones in silent mode. After the lecture is over, we'll also have a Q&A session. I now hand over to Dr. Yelleri. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Snigdha. Respected dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not taking too much time, just a minute to fill in, and then I hand it over to the chair. As you're aware, and as Snigdha has said, this is sincere effort by Ms. Anuradha Dutt and all those academician teachers who always believe that knowledge and experience sharing is the most important thing. And it is that family who believe that no one has ever become poor from giving. Knowledge, experience is something which we should keep giving and sharing. It is with this spirit, ICS continues to engage in holding series of lectures, interactions among most of us, believing that such interaction and open house exchanges are important and core of extending our expertise to others and creating new capacities. It's just been holding number of events. I'm not going to repeat too much, but AICCS, IFC, memorial lecturers are some of them who represent actually the core of this oldest and premier institute on China studies and East Asia in Delhi in India. Ladies and gentlemen, and at this point of juncture and with this spirit, we dedicated this program to our teachers, great academicians, and across the table, around the table, we see three generations of experts on China and East Asia sitting here. 20 years back, I was a student. I was coming and sitting and listening to some of the uh, teachers and our professors over here, and it is a really an opportunity to come here and join most of you over here. It is this spirit which is most important for ICS. And with this spirit, we continue to engage in ideas and also build capacities. Despite different challenges and difficulties, we continue to do this thing and we will continue to do this. As they say, those who are the happiest are those who do most for others. And ICS, with our partners, continues to be happy. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thank you. My babe and friends, let me share a bit of history because I find that the five people who first met in Sapru House lawns, two of us are still alive and sitting here, Binod Khanna and myself. Giridhar Sinkar, Mira Sinha, and GPD are no more. The bit of history I want to share, just in about 5 minutes, is also about VP Dutt and Gargi Dutt. I was doing Chinese language course. I was already a lecturer in a college in Delhi University. And one day, VP Dutt, who was also in the same building as our department in Banarsidas Estate, Mall Road, called me and said, look, we want to send the next next batch of scholars, and we would like you to consider uh, joining this group. So BP Dutt initiated me to this program. I mean, I was doing Chinese. I was a student of Tanchung. How I joined, that was another story. When I saw this board, Center for Chinese Studies, and found out that it had started language program at 9 p.m. with another friend. We landed in Tanchung's house in Rupnagar. I said, can I join? He said, yes, tomorrow you join. That's how I joined Chinese language. Anyway, and VP Dutt, another very personal thing I want to share. I mean, he has mentored this whole program in Delhi University and before that in School of International Studies. I had no grant for my field work. I had done some work before, and I had come to India to do my field work in the Naxalite movement areas, and particularly in West Bengal. And there was no time to apply for any fund, and at that time, I think it would have been very difficult to get any support. He advanced a personal loan for me to finance my research. I think I have never said it before. Anyway, BP Dutt combined scholarship with politics of a certain kind, valued politics. He was a member of Rajya Sabha. And this audience knows very well about his contribution. That's why when the proposal came to have this lecture series named after him, we were so happy. Gargi Dutt did her PhD on the Chinese communes. She was also a professor of Chinese studies at the young people should know this, in SIS, then JNU. And her PhD was on Chinese communes. And I got interested in Chinese political economy from Gargi Dutt's research and publications. So I take particular delight, a privilege, dream it as a privilege to chair this occasion. Professor Babev, I was telling you how the Russia, India, China academic forum started. Professor Titarenko, academician Titarenko of Russian Academy of Social Sciences, he approached us with this idea in a visit. And we were very excited. I remember in the very first discussion, Vinod Khanna was very positive, and so was C.V. Ranganathan, who had just retired. And we were in the ICS together. And I must record, and that was 2000, 2001, that period, Bajpayee government was in power. And Shiv Shankar Menon and T.C.A. Rangachari both were very positive, saying that, look, who can stop you people? And another two ambassadors sitting here who were later on very supportive, three ambassadors sitting here who were later on very, very supportive to all our programs. So, and then we approached Marchiali, both Titrenko and I had this common friend, Marchiali, and well, Marchiali is known to so many of us here. And that's how the first workshop in Delhi, then the first meeting in Moscow started. Well, we therefore regard this as a very important initiative to discuss the possibility of Russia, India, China cooperation. The way you have formulated it is so enchanting. I'm delighted. We know the problems are enormous, problems confronting all three countries and the world. Later this year, we are going to celebrate in this room the 70th anniversary of the Bandung Conference. So we are taking up many of these issues. I welcome Anuradha here. Thank you very much. She is the daughter of the Dutt, who has instituted this series. Thank you. So these issues will come up. So we are very excited to welcome you, and we hope that we will have a continuing program of collaboration between ICS and your institute. Thank you very much, and may I invite you to now speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and actually that's what I wanted to start with, is to express my deep gratitude for inviting me here and for making it an opportunity for me to speak in front of such a respectable audience. That's an honor for me to have the former ambassadors and the members of the government here in this room. So I'm quite nervous speaking my thoughts in front of such a respectable audience. Actually, I also would like to thank you for the introduction of myself. I would like to introduce our institute a little bit, just to say a few words about where I work now. So the Institute of China and Contemporary Asia was founded back in the 60s, when it was called the Institute of Far Eastern Studies. By that time, it was only studying China and Soviet-Chinese relations, but the Soviet government decided that they shouldn't use China in the name because of the very poor relationship with China by that time, the 60s. So it was called the Institute of the Far East, such an euphemism. We decided to change it only 2 years back, when we decided to rename it and make it an Institute of China and Contemporary Asia, because in China they do have many institutes of Russia, So we decided we need one Institute of China in Russia. We don't have Institute of India, by the way, which is, again, some disadvantage, and I think we need to change it. So our institute is not only in charge of studying China, contemporary China, but also all the countries of contemporary Southeast, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia. So we are in charge of not the classical topics like philosophy, linguistics, philology, or history, but we study the the current situation in those countries, including economies, internal policies, and foreign policies, and international relations between the countries. So we mostly work for the Ministry of Foreign Relations, for the government of the Russian Federation, and for the presidential office. We prepare analytical reports, we prepare all the major state visits, including the presidential visits, and many international events with the participation of the state. So we are quite helpful now to the Russian authorities to formulate their Oriental policy and policy towards our major partners in Asia, including definitely India and China. So we are quite active now because of this very pivot to the east, as we call it, the main trend of the Russian foreign policy in the last 3 years. Since the new Iron Curtain was built for us in the western border, we have to turn to the east, and we have to develop our policy towards the Asian countries, which became our most important partners at the moment. And which is good, in my opinion, because Asia is the place which is the epicenter of the world technology and the world development at the moment. The whole civilization is now developing the most fast rate here in Asia. This is why it's definitely useful for Russia to be here and to be together with the Asian countries. So that's what we are doing in the institute. Our very old and very successful project was, which Professor Mohanty just mentioned, the RIC conference, Russia, India, China Academic Forum, which had its latest gathering this autumn 2024 in Moscow, and which was quite a success. We actually visited the leadership of the Russian foreign ministry, and they told us that, well, we foreign ministers here, we cannot gather the three of us, unfortunately, since before the COVID, and you managed to do it, so lucky you. But we definitely will gather this year as well in Beijing, and probably next year here in Delhi. So we continue this tradition, which I think is a very powerful and very important instrument of helping our governments to understand each other. I will not talk much because I would like a discussion to follow my lecture, because I definitely want to hear you and to listen to your questions and opinions on how the three of us, the great powers of Asia, should cooperate in order to build a better future for both the Eurasia and the humanity. But I would just like to share a couple of thoughts which might be interesting for the audience, just because I was told I'm the first Russian lecturer speaking here in this room in this project of memorial lectures. So the first thing I would like to start with is that I would call this process a very big and a very complicated game, which is now happening. We just discussed it with one of the colleagues before the lecture, that this game is becoming more and more complex because new players are starting to emerge, and the world is absolutely unpredictable. We are living in turbulent times, which President Xi Jinping once called that we are living in times of change unseen in a century. And I think which is quite right, because we really see a revolution in the international relations happening now, today, happening with our participation. And it's us to shape it, and it's us to define the consequences of this revolution. Why is that revolution possible at all? What does the world need? And what does the world lack? The first thing which irritates most countries at the moment is the domination of the United States in the international politics and in the world economy. This is the factor which is quite important because the United States and their allies are trying to impose their way of life, their way of thinking, and their dominance in the security policy, in the world economy, in the financial world, and so on, which is no longer acceptable by the growing countries of the so-called global south. For example, they impose unilateral sanctions, which are quite numerous at the moment. Just I saw the statistics recently. In 1991, there were only about 200 sanctions between the countries all over the world. 200 sanctions. Now we have about 12,000 sanctions in about Russia only, against Russia. They have sanctions against China. They have sanctions against Iran, against Central Asian republics, against United Arab Emirates, against any company that has something to deal with those countries that the West doesn't approve of. And this is the problem because you cannot be sure about your future as a business person or as a country. And many politicians all around the global south, in Asia and in Africa and in Latin America told me that, well, we cannot be sure about the future because one day they can impose sanctions on our currency or on our banks, on our financial system, and we cannot do nothing about that. That is the problem. The domination was there for long ago, since World War II, but it is quite different, the situation, from somewhere back in the 50s, because, for example, it is not acceptable today because of the new centers of power emerging. Countries like China, India, Saudi Arabia, Iran, South Africa, Brazil, these leaders of the emerging world, of the global south, are much more powerful today, and they seek their place in the common general international relations system. They don't have it at all. They are not sitting as permanent members of the UN Security Council. They cannot influence the global financial system. They do not control the World Bank or the IMF or the World Trade Organization. And they cannot influence the processes which are going on either in the world politics or in the world economy. And this is what irritates the global south most of all. So the global south, we sometimes call the global majority, the term which was coined just recently, and I think is gaining more and more popularity, because the global majority means every country which is not content with the current situation and which would like to get more rights, more say in the world politics and the world economy. And it doesn't only include southern countries, because Russia is also a part of the global majority, and Russia cannot be called a southern country, as unfortunately. And some of its European allies, even some of the countries of the European Union, which are now against the current dictatorship of the West, of the United States, cannot be called the West any longer, but should be called the global majority, because they also understand that the world order should be changed and the world rules should be absolutely different. So what are these rules? So what should be different? This is a good question. I think there are only few things that are now very important for the global majority, for all the countries who are now thinking about the future in long-term perspective. First of all, it's the respect for all the national interests. If your national interests are respected by the international system, you can be sure that you will be not bombed tomorrow, that the global community respects your political system, your social system, your economic policy, your way of life. Otherwise, there may be some arbitrary decisions, just as the United States have taken a lot of arbitrary decisions to bomb Libya, to bomb Iraq, to invade Yugoslavia, and to attack quite a lot of other countries around the globe just because they thought that their political system should be changed. We should define our political systems ourselves. This is the principle of the United Nations, and there is a principle of non-interference, which is no longer valid just because the United States have violated it so many times. And there is also a need to reform the UN system, especially the UN Security Council. I know that India has long demanded its vote in the UN Security Council as a permanent member, and Russia has always supported this claim. We thought that all the regional leaders, the countries which are now developing very fast and which already occupy quite an important place in the world economy, should be there in the Security Council. And again, the West is blocking it. The third thing that they need is the economic fair treatment for all, which means that no unilateral sanctions might be imposed by any country that may affect the economy of a different state. This is very, very important, because otherwise you cannot be sure that these sanctions will not be imposed on you or on your country, on your bank, on your financial organization tomorrow morning. You cannot be sure about the future of your currency. Anything. Just there can be no superpower controlling the international financial system. And now it's not the case. So definitely the countries of the global south, especially those who have huge trade turnovers, such as India, for example, they demand more fair treatment and more predictable policy of that. The problem of the West is that the domination itself is probably just problem number one, but problem number two is inconsistency. The US policy is quite inconsistent, as we can see every day. We start our day today with the news from the White House, and every day these news are quite shocking because, well, they change their mind all the time. And they invent some very interesting ideas about, well, occupying different countries or so on. Nobody says this is the violation of the international rules. So this is another problem, the inconsistency. What the global majority also needs is a free transportation of goods and people across the borders. This is very important because there have been so many new restrictions, so many new limitations, borders, even not physical borders, but financial borders, trade borders, and so on, imposed by the West, which are definitely treated by the global majority countries as not fair. So we need to create a new, absolutely new international regulation system about the international transportation, logistics, things like that, in order to allow our goods and people to be transported freely, quickly, and promptly. This is also very important. Another one, which is also demanded by the global majority, is the new or at least modified international financial system. In the situation where the SWIFT, for example, the international banking message system, is controlled by only one country, is absolutely unnatural and definitely should be changed. Otherwise, any transaction between the countries, any trans-border financial operation can be just cancelled because of the will of some government, and definitely this is not a fair treatment that we're speaking about. So we need a new international system. If the current international financial system cannot be changed, then definitely the global majority needs a new one, an alternative system of financial transactions based on some kind of non-political, at least, mechanism of making financial transactions between the countries, between the banks, and between the companies. Today, this situation is too politically oriented, and this is why not acceptable. What they also need is the rule of law. Just recently, I spoke with one of my friends. He is an Arab sheikh working in London for many years already. And he told me that the business in London is not safe any longer as it used to be, even not long ago. About 5-6 years ago, they felt absolutely fine with the rule of law in Europe, in Great Britain, in the United States, because they knew that that nothing would happen with their money, with their business, just because there is law. If you follow the law, everything is fine with your business. Nowadays, it's not the case. Nowadays, the court can say, all right, this is against some kind of sanction. This is against some kind of governmental regulation which was issued yesterday evening, and this is why we're closing your business down. Well, this is not a normal situation, not only for Russian businesses, but also for businesses from all the developing world, from all the global majority countries in the West. They cannot be sure about their money any longer, and they cannot be sure about their rights. I heard so many stories about the violation of rights because of this sanction story, because when it's introduced, these sanctions, sometimes the courts, the legal system, they do not understand what is allowed and what is not allowed. And this is why they take decisions just not allowing anything, just not to be responsible. So this creates a chaos. And this chaos will probably go on in at least unless we change it. So what we can do all about those problems at the moment? Eurasia is probably the fastest growing region in the world economically. It's definitely the epicenter of many innovations, and it's home to some of the fastest growing economies in the world. Those which will probably shape the global economy years ahead and decades ahead. Some of them are Russia, India, and China. They are all the largest in different senses. India is the most populous country and one of the fastest growing economies of Eurasia. China is the future, probably tomorrow, economy number one in the world and the technological leader. Russia is the most powerful nuclear country and nuclear power of the world. So these three players can play a very important and probably an overwhelming role in shaping the Eurasia of the future. And this is what we call the Greater Eurasia, as we call it. Definitely there are other players. We have very dynamically developing Arab countries like Saudi Arabia or the Emirates or Qatar. We have Iran, which is also doing very nice. We have the ASEAN countries, many of which are developing very fast and definitely will become leaders in the nearest future, including Indonesia and Vietnam and Thailand, Malaysia. So some of them will definitely become the new leaders of the region. However, no one can create a new system of international relations just unilaterally, alone. We cannot do it alone. None of us. Because, for example, Russia has political influence and its nuclear potential, but it doesn't have an economy as strong as China has. China has got a very strong economy, but it doesn't have very good relations with a number of states in Asia, and it doesn't have a lot of political influence in countries, in regions like Africa or Latin America. India has got very strong technological sector and a very fast growing economy, but it also does not have enough influence so far in the developing world. So even the two of the three cannot create a stable system, because we need all the three to participate. And this was the idea of creating this dialogue, the trilateral dialogue between Russia, India, and China. This was a great idea because all the three of them are first of all worried about what will happen in Eurasia and how Eurasia will look like in the future, and what the role of the emerging world will be in this new Eurasian world. They're also growing. They're also seeking more influence and more rights in the global politics. So their interests are more or less the same. And they are the same with the rest of the global majority, more or less, because they also need respect, they also need the louder voice in the global politics, the global security system. They also need fair treatment in the economic regard. So the interests are very much in common between the three major players and the smaller players, the regional leaders, the smaller countries of Eurasia. So the system of international relations cannot be created unless these three players unite their forces. And this is a very important task, because no one has a controlling stake. This is a big advantage of the new emerging system of international relations. No one has a controlling stake. Look at BRICS, for example. They can only take decisions if they are taken unanimously. So you have to get a positive reaction of every neighbor of yours. Now it's about 10 countries and some more partners of BRICS. It's developing very fast. And the difference between BRICS and the Western system is that there is no dominant player. So nobody is afraid that some country will gain all the power in just one hand. This is quite different from what we have now, and this is quite, this gives us a hope that a new, more fair system can be built on this basis. Three countries can do it together. Two countries cannot do it at all, in my opinion. So China and Russia, they are strategic partners at the moment, but they cannot do it together without India. Because India has a stake in South Asia, in Central Asia, in the Middle East, has got good relations with a number of other countries. India has got a very balanced foreign policy, which is definitely very important. And India has got respect from most of the developing world, even since this Bandung conference and the non-alignment movement, which was founded back in the 50s. So this is why I think we need the consent of the three in order to build this common greater Eurasia. And we have the base. We have a very good base already, which is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You know that Russia, India, and China are all the three the members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And this is probably one of the most powerful mechanisms which can create stability and security in the whole of Eurasia. We are also members, and actually founding members, of BRICS, which gives us a foundation for economic cooperation between the three. So we have an infrastructure already which might allow us to build this greater Eurasia together. Probably we don't need any more, and we definitely need the RIC format to stay there. We need this trilateral format between the authorities, the governments, the scientific communities, cultural communities, in order to understand each other better. But the initial steps have already been taken and they're quite successful. So we have all the basis to go for this greater Eurasia together. In 2015, President Putin proposed this idea of the big Eurasian partnership, which is a good idea, unifying all the initiatives which are now in hand in Eurasia, such as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Road and Belt Initiative of China and the Eurasian Economic Union, which Russia has created, and many other projects, ASEAN, the Arab Gulf Cooperation Community, many others. So to unify these multilateral formats together, we can create this big Eurasian partnership which might solve the problems that I just outlined earlier and create a single and unique common partnership in the whole of Eurasia. This is our big chance, because I think if the three of us agree on that, for example, if the three of us, Russia, India, and China, create a financial system which will work stable and which will guarantee that payments and transactions are going smoothly and the banks are operating fine, I'm absolutely sure that the next morning dozens of other states from Asia and probably Africa will also join, because they need it. They need a system which guarantees safety and quick rate of transactions. The same with the trade mechanism. If we create a trade infrastructure together that will serve our purposes, then I'm absolutely sure that the Central Asian republics and countries of South Asia, ASEAN, most countries whose largest trade partners are now India and China, they will also join. I'm absolutely sure that if they see that something is being done, that the new infrastructure is created, and this new infrastructure does not depend on unilateral decisions of the West, they will join very quickly. So that's what we can do. We can at least show an example. So what is actually needed to make this possible? What do we need to make this ambitious project start work? Number one, we definitely need India and China to resolve their border issues. That's absolutely number one. You know, I've got an example in hand. 40 years ago, we had absolutely no relations with China, not at all. The embassies were not working, and the businesses were not communicating with each other. There was almost no trade and almost no diplomatic relations between the two. After that, we solved our border issues, which we also had with China. We have 4,300 kilometers of the border, much more than India and China have now. And we solved it. It took time and a number of effort and a number of people working with 24 hours a day to make this possible. It was a compromise. There were many islands on the Amur River that we had to seduce to China, and China had to seduce to us. There were a lot of different border issues. For example, on one island in the middle of the Amur River, they decided to split this island into two halves, just equal halves. But it appeared that there was an Orthodox church standing there, and it goes to the Chinese part. And the Chinese told us, all right, take the church. Take this district with the church. So that was a compromise. And such a compromise is absolutely possible between India and China. And I'm absolutely sure that very soon after China and India resolve all the border issues between each other, they will have nothing to have disputes about. And this will boost the economic cooperation, and this will boost the political cooperation between the two, because it creates trust. Population in Russia was always in the Far East of Russia. It was always very cautious about the Chinese, because They were sure that, well, billions of Chinese will once come and attack us and take us hostages and take our lands. After we resolved all the border issues, such fears have disappeared almost completely. And now we have a very strong partnership which is developing very nicely just because we have no disputes and the society doesn't have anything to speculate on. This is a very, very sensitive question for the society, for the common people, the border things, the land, the territories. So as soon as China and India can solve this issue, there will be no other issues in hand, I'm absolutely sure. And this will create a strategic partnership between the two which will benefit both. Definitely, well, China and India are big boys already that can understand this much better than me. But, well, Russia makes everything possible to at least sit them down at the table to negotiate, either in the Shanghai Organization or in BRICS or in the RIC Academic Forum and our institute. We do a lot to make China and India understand each other. And finally, I'm absolutely sure soon this will be resolved. So, but this is number one, definitely what we need to make this greater Eurasia project successful. Number two is what we need is the common currency instrument, I should call it cautiously. Not a currency unit probably, but an instrument that we can use in the financial system. There were talks and there are talks inside the BRICS about the common financial infrastructure and currency, common currency. We haven't yet reached any agreement because it's very hard if you have 10 countries at stake. But if you have only 3, it's much easier. China and Russia already have very productive negotiations about digital currencies, national digital currencies, the digital renminbi and the digital ruble. I think we can invent something together with India to make it happen. And I think as soon as we have the international currency instrument between the three of us, many countries will join very soon. So I think this is number two, what we definitely need to make it a success. We, the three countries, should agree on the trade policy. This is number three. The trade policy is very important, probably creating some free trade zones, probably signing some free trade agreements between the three, which will increase cooperation in the trade sector. We have boosted our trade with China enormously, 10 times in the last, 12 years, something like that, or even 10 years. 10 times. And I'm sure that the common trade infrastructure can be created also between the three. Russia is definitely interested in that. China is also quite interested, so I think for India it's also a beneficial idea to create this kind of trade policy together with Russia and China. We should merge, this is number 4, we should merge our logistic projects. India has got quite an ambitious, quite an interesting project of transportation corridor between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean. China has got a very ambitious project of road and belt. Russia has got its Eurasian Economic Union, which is working fine. So if we merge these three together, I think we will get a common Eurasia, at least in transportation means. So I mean that if we build corridors between the three, that will include ports, ground transportation, border points, many things. But still, this is an ambitious project, and Russia is now very much occupied with building the so-called North-South corridor between Russia and India, which will probably include the Caspian, then Iran, Pakistan, and India. which will create enormous opportunities for both of us and those countries which I just mentioned. We are also creating the East-West corridor with China, which will include Kazakhstan in Central Asia and Mongolia. Also quite an interesting project. So together we can reach it quicker, and we can start working on it much sooner. So this is a good idea to join the efforts in making the transportation union, the so-called logistics union between the three. I think this is definitely also what we need. And the fifth point that we definitely need, we need a kind of treaty, a common statement of the principles of our cooperation. You know, in 2022, in February, there was a state visit, I think, of President Putin to Beijing, when they signed a common statement regarding the common principles of understanding the future of the world. It is a lengthy document, but a very important one, because it summarized the positions and the opinions of both countries on how they see the future of the world in general, in terms of democracy, principles of global governance, economic principles, and so on. They were declaring their common ground. This declaration is very important because on it grow quite a lot of other documents between, I don't know, business communities and cultural communities and humanitarian organizations, anything. So we need some kind of a treaty like that between the three, summarizing those common points that we share with India and China, of how we see the future of the world politics and the world economy. And I'm sure we can find quite a lot of things in common for this document. And this document will be a basement, a kind of a foundation for the future development of the Greater Eurasia project, and probably the future of our planet at all. But because, as for me, I don't see any other continent which can be so successful in merging the efforts of all to create a new system of international relations. Here in Eurasia, we can do it. I'm not sure it can be done in Africa. I'm not sure it can be done in Latin America, right? In North America, they tried to do it once, but well, we see how it failed. What is also quite important to say here is that it's not a friendship against someone. It's not destructive. It's actually quite constructive. We create something new because the circumstances have changed in the world. We are much stronger than before, and this is why we need to express our institutes more loudly. This is why it's not definitely something anti-Western and anti-American. It's not an alliance against anything. It's not actually an alliance. We don't have an alliance with China, and we don't need it. Because we are good strategic partners. We share our understanding of the world issues, regional problems, world problems, and solutions to these problems, and that's what we need. And we don't need a kind of an alliance, such as the NATO, for example. I don't think we will create anything like that. But what we need is a kind of a constructive merger of common interests in order to create something bigger. You remember that the European Union was created when Germany, France, and Italy joined their forces. And everyone else followed them because they invented the new principles of cooperation. They created quite a stable, quite a solid organization, the European Union, which is still going on. So I think we can create at least something similar to that, or even better than that, because we know the mistakes of the European Union and we can avoid them while building our own community. So together we can benefit both each other and the whole of Eurasia, and I'm sure the whole world. And while we are acting without consent, I'm not sure this will happen. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. That was a very challenging statement, extremely interesting, and very concrete ideas about moving forward. Well, now it is open for questions and comments. I will not summarize at all. Yes, Professor Kenneth King.
I didn't hear the J word, Japan. So I wonder if Japan is not inside Greater Eurasia, and how can that be explained?
Shall we take a couple of
Okay.
more questions?
Okay.
Yeah, Professor Kirle, you are silent about Pakistan issue. For India, is a very big issue, and China is a very hostile to India. And when we are saying India, Russia, and China, so what will be position of Russia about Pakistan?
Yes, Ambassador Nalin Suri.
Thank you, Professor, for this fascinating presentation of what has been evolving in the Russian-Chinese thinking for the last 15 years, more concretized in the last, I would say, 5 to 6 years. But I have a much more basic question to put to you. The presumption behind this entire proposal is that the antagonistic relationship between Russia and the West and China and the West will continue, and that the war in Ukraine will continue indefinitely. After the bulk of the sanctions on Russia came after the war in Ukraine. But there is now talk of a compromise in Ukraine, which seems quite likely and feasible, considering how quickly the Ukrainian position has changed its side and the Russian position has changed very dramatically. Now, if there is settlement on Ukraine, part of that will be the lifting of many of the sanctions on Russia, because I think no Russia will accept that without that happening. Now, in that changed situation, are you still going to be batting for this greater Eurasia? Are you in a position to establish a new global order, which has a new global security structure? It's not just a question of getting BRICS and SCO and the others together. How do you guarantee security in Eurasia?
Good evening, sir. Thank you for the comprehensive lecture. I have two questions. First question is, you talked about the robust and resilient economic infrastructure between India, Russia, and China. While India has time and again echoed that we live in a multipolar world, and in this backdrop, how will you ensure the security of the region, mainly in the context of the Asia Pacific or Indo Pacific, as we understand? Because perception certainly matter in geopolitics, and as US has got large stakes in Asia region. My second question is, does North Korea have any place in the Russia India China cooperation, if it's possible in future? Also, in future, will North Korea continue as a strong ally partner once the Russia Ukraine war is over? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Monti. Indeed, of course, very fascinating, and as Professor Monti said, challenging some of the statements and comments. Thank you very much for that. But my question is a very supplementary one to the Ambassador Suri's question on Ukraine. I mean, given that now there is a hope that there might be a solution in the offing, and especially if you go by what President Trump has been saying on Ukraine. I don't know whether he is serious or not. But my question is that, I mean, I read quite a lot of articles and commentaries in the Chinese media, and I get this feeling that Chinese will not be very happy if there is a solution in the coming for Ukraine-Russia war. So, because yesterday also I read one commentary in a major mainstream Chinese media, which said that on Russia-Ukraine war, each one is talking in their own way. So, what is your comment on that? I mean, is there any understanding of Chinese interest or position on Russia-Ukraine war? Where is it heading?
Yeah. Professor Babaib, you have come up with a very bold presentation on what can be attempted to shape a new Eurasian architecture. One set of problems arise from what Ambassador Nalunsiri and Professor Atlaka referred to, that the vision you have outlined is contingent on a certain situation continuing. In India, we actually hope that that situation will not continue, that adversarial relationship between Russia and the West, which is quite unhealthy from our point of view, should be overcome at some point of time. And we recognize that Russia has, this two-headed eagle approach. One side you look at Europe, this very important part of your history, culture, personality, and your preoccupation is not going away. And Eurasia. If there is some lowering of tensions between Russia and the West, that situation can change very dramatically and for us in a positive direction. But we have a second set of problem, more directly linked to our relations with China, which should not be underestimated. I've been part of Russia, India, China dialogue, both at track 1 and track 2 level. And I must confess that my takeaway from those discussions has been uniformly unsatisfactory. Very seldom we have been able to come up with ideas, concrete ideas we could agree on. We have a problem, the triangular relationship we have between Russia, India, and China. We are often reminded that two arms of the triangle are doing relatively well, but one arm is rather weak. Unfortunately, that situation is not going away. I've been a border negotiator. I don't at all share your optimism about likelihood of early boundary settlement in India and China. And if your hypothesis is predicated on boundary settlement, I'm afraid it's not likely to come about anytime soon. Equally important, even if through some magic there's boundary settlement, there are very significant structural problems between India and China which will not melt away. We have to be honest about it. We don't see China as being supportive of rise of India, and I'm making that statement very deliberately. So the architecture you are proposing, predicated on Russia, India, and China coming together, to my mind, it's not a very likely scenario. Russia and India, yes, we have very strong ties, anchored equally in the past and contemporary interests. But India and China, I can't say the same thing at this point of time. I don't share that optimism you have articulated.
first round.
Thanks a lot.
Be ready for the second round.
Thanks. Very nice questions. Very interesting questions. So thank you all. I will probably start with from the end. Definitely there are structural problems. Definitely there are historical problems, economic problems, third-party problems such as Pakistan and things like that between India and China. Quite a lot of issues to be solved. What I'm trying to say is that they can only be solved if the two parties see more benefit in cooperating than in leaving the status quo. And they can only see the benefit if they see a common ground and a common future. If the two governments can see that the future might be better together, not probably on a bilateral basis, but on a multilateral basis, such as BRICS, such as the Shanghai Organization, or the three of us, then I think the two governments will only need goodwill, and one by one, these problems will be resolved. Again, we have a good example of our own relationship with China. This is possible. And actually, well, historically, we can have a number of examples like that. These can be resolved. Even the contradictions between Russia and the West, which are, I think, much stronger than between China and India, can be resolved now. You see how the situation is changing very rapidly with the Trump coming. So I think that, well, we should be positive about that, otherwise we will not move anywhere. That's my response to the last question, but thank you very much for it. Now, the place of Japan. Well, definitely Japan, the European Union, South Korea, they are all parts of this Eurasian community of nations, and important parts, quite important at least economically, but also culturally and so on. And again, I think that the limits which are dividing the Western-oriented countries like Japan or South Korea and non-Western countries like Russia or China, they're quite artificial and quite political. I'm sure that they can be overwhelmed if the general agreement is made between Russia and the West, China and the West, if we speak it with Trump language, a deal is brokered between West and Russia, West and China, then I think it will be very easy to restore the partnership between, for example, Russia and Japan or Russia and South Korea, because the business in both countries, by the way, are very much reluctant to leave Russia because they are losing quite a lot of money from energy projects, from exporting their goods to Russia. So the business of South Korea, they're still in Russia, they are working, they didn't go. The Japanese business has gone, but they are suffering from it, and they will definitely go back, I think, one day. So we shouldn't exclude anyone from this Eurasian community. This would be a bad idea because it's a destructive idea. The same with the European Union. I'm absolutely sure that the European Union is a part of the future Eurasian community of nations. I'm sure because, well, first of all, Russia is a European country, and it's a European civilization. We have always been there, and we will always remain a European country. We will never become an Asian civilization just because culturally for thousands of years we have been there. And I'm sure we will find the common language with them, because this common language is practical. It's trade, it's cultural exchange, it's common past, it's quite a lot of various economic and humanitarian ideas that we share. So I'm absolutely sure that Europe might one day also become part of a common project. You know, there was a project of a greater Europe from Lisbon to Vladivostok. There was a project like that back in the 2000. but then it vanished because of these tensions between Russia and mostly the United States, not Europe. So I think this can be overwhelmed as well. For China, it's very much important to deal with Europe. Probably Europe is the most important, together with ASEAN countries. For China, Europe is quite an important economic partner. And they would like to be there. And they're absolutely not happy with the war in Ukraine because they lose a personal touch with the European Union because of this war. They are losing quite a lot of projects. You know, the Road and Belt Initiative was invented to link China with Europe mostly, via the Russian territory and the Russian northern ports and so on. So China is losing these opportunities if the war continues. This is why China is, in my opinion, absolutely interested in ending the war. This is quite practical from the economic standpoint. They definitely need to re-establish ties with Europe and to export their goods and to have access to the markets. And what they get with the war, they get only sanctions and restrictions and limitations and securitization, I would call it, from Europe. So they don't need it, and I'm absolutely sure that China will be happy if the solution is found to the Ukrainian situation. In general, we all hope that the Ukrainian war will end very soon. In Russia, definitely we hope for it, and we definitely don't need it to last longer because we lose lives, and this is the most important thing. The only thing we need is the respect of our national interests. That's just what I was telling, that we need to see this respect from the United States, that they respect our national interests, which are understandable, clear, and quite transparent, and we respect theirs. So in case the Trump administration would like to negotiate on that and would have goodwill to find a solution, then we will once find a solution. Actually, we did it many times during the Cold War. We were nuclear powers, and, well, one of us could just break any rules of cooperation and start a conflict anywhere in the world, but, well, we know these conflicts didn't lead to anything than losing lives. This is why the Cold War system was at least stable, because both parties understood that they will only lose lives, money, and in case they don't agree with each other. It's the same situation nowadays. I think that we're closer now to the understanding that the war will not benefit anyone, and this is why we're closer to the end of the war, I think, than a year ago or 2 years ago. So I very much hope that it will end by the end of this year. There was a question about Pakistan. I'm not a specialist actually on Pakistan. I definitely know that there are quite a lot of issues, and this also concerns China quite a lot because they have a strategic partnership with Pakistan. I'm sure that during the negotiations, it's always possible to start with some easier points just to go forward, just to see that we can do some small steps, minor steps forward, in order just to start a compromise. And then more complex, more complicated questions will be put on the table. I think the Pakistan issue is just like that. Probably we shouldn't touch it at all, unless we solve more vivid, more solvable questions, something like that. And this is important. There was a question about North Korea also. We have signed a strategic partnership agreement with North Korea. In fact, this is a political alliance, even a military alliance with North Korea. This was a response to the alliance signed by Japan, South Korea, and the United States, the so-called Camp David agreements, which was forming the military bloc of the three in the Pacific region. So inevitably, those countries against whom this military bloc was created, definitely they would like to coordinate their efforts, and this is why this happened. It doesn't have any kind of aggressive plans, and it would be crazy to think that we should make any plans aggressive on the Korean Peninsula. However, I think that North Korea would be much better integrated into some kind of treaties with larger players than just left alone. Because the regime in North Korea is quite peculiar, I should say, the least. And this is why they should be tied with some treaties with more predictable countries like Russia or China, in case we need them to be predictable themselves. This is why I think probably it's to the better, this cooperation between Russia and North Korea at the moment.
Okay.
That's it, yes.
Yeah. Okay, Shruti.
Yeah, hi, my name is Shruti and I'm a research analyst at Center for Social and Economic Progress. Thank you, Professor, for the lecture, but I have two sets of questions. The first one being that through this Ukraine war, we've understood that all three countries, in some way or the other, are believers of spheres of influence. So the global south or the global majority that you are imagining, where do these spheres of influence of these three countries lie? And all of these spheres are overlapping. For example, South Asia is the area where India is the dominant country, but there is a lot of contestation with China. Same applies to Central Asia that you mentioned, that the area of cooperation, but that's a conflict zone in terms of influence for Russia and China. So what happens? And if this is what you're imagining, that each country has its own sphere of influence, what makes you think that countries of the global south that have already seen the vices of American domination will accept the domination of this new world order? Why would they want such an order again? And my second question is that instead of imagining big frameworks, why is it not more prudent to start with smaller areas of cooperation where, for example, climate change? Here also, these three countries have not been able to cooperate. So, again, how is your hypothesis going to work for larger issues? Thank you.
Vidya Nambiar.
What kind of a role do you see, Mr. Babayev, of the reformed multilateralism of a UN, including the Bretton Woods institution, in your vision of a greater Eurasian community?
Good evening. My name is Keshav Padmanabhan, and I'm a journalist with ThePrint. I cover foreign policy and diplomacy. Again, I have two sets of questions. Now, when we look at, for example, the European Union, and when we study the European Union, there's a set of values, right? There's democracy, which is considered to be a necessity to be an EU member. There's a criteria, the Maastricht criteria, right? So there's a sense of a semblance of values. In the greater Eurasian sphere, what are those values? China has a very different set of viewing the world. India and Russia are democracies to an extent. And how do we then look at those values? You have countries like Pakistan that has different values. So my point is, you have values connecting the EU that make sense. You don't have that in the greater Eurasian sphere. So how do you sort of bridge that in your vision of things? And the second thing, and the larger question I have is, Eurasia is a very complicated region with different political systems. How do we bridge that? Because if you look at Central Asia, you have Uzbekistan that is opening towards democracy. You have Kazakhstan, which is not really a very democratic country. You have Turkmenistan that really doesn't like the world outside of Turkmenistan, right? So you have not just an issue of values, but you have an issue of political systems. So how do you make that work in a larger idea taking, and all of this is predicated, and I'm going with your hypothesis that we solve the boundary question with China. We solve all of these other issues and we go with that hypothesis, then how do you bridge these larger cultural and political issues?
Good evening. My name is Abu Zafar, and my question is like how you see India's mediation effort in the Ukraine-Russia war, because Prime Minister tried to do that and he visited both Kyiv and Moscow. So how Russians see this? Thank you.
I mean, there have been such a lot of interesting questions and huge problems raised, and these are real problems. We always look for solutions. But I think when you have Russia, as you mentioned, with the nuclear power, India with a growing economic power, and China and technological power, and China with a growing economic power, I think one of the problems that we already have in this multilateral United Nations that we talk about, which is failing, and if we were serious, I think, the problems that face the world would be settled there. We haven't done that. Why aren't those countries who are interested in making that the center with changes, huge changes of reform? I think you would get exactly the same issues coming over on the financial, on the defense. It's kind of, it seems as if this is a deal that we're looking for rather than a global, culturally based, because I think in the end, if we're not there as people with our thoughts, I simply find it terribly problematic hearing what you're suggesting as a possibility.
Else? Okay, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for these lovely questions. So I would probably start with the principles. We should start with the principles, right? I actually started my lecture with that. Probably you misheard the first part, or you were absent from the room, because I actually started with the common principles of what the global majority is now thinking of the current situation and of the future of the world. I will not repeat it because it's recorded on tape already, but we do have common principles, and one of them is definitely the principles which are laid in the foundation of the UN Charter. One of them is the respect to the different political and social systems, which I also mentioned. This is very important. When the Entente alliance was forming in the beginning of the 20th century, France was a republic. The Russian Empire was an absolute monarchy, and the British, they were a constitutional monarchy. And they didn't create any obstacles for them to create an alliance, which survived and won the First World War. We can create an alliance at least in economic and financial sphere, in security sphere, with countries with different political systems, if we decide that the principle of our cooperation is the respect for political and social systems in different countries. That can be done, and I think this is exactly the matter of principles. And these principles should be written down between the three and signed, just as we did it with China just recently, because this is important. So I agree with you that the principles are important, but I disagree absolutely with you that the principles are not there. They are there, and most of them are written in the UN Charter. You just need to follow them. The principle of non-interference is one of them, the principle of fair treatment for economies, and the respect for national interests, and many others are just normal and usual for us in the present world, but they're just not followed by some of the countries or at least one of the country. The other one, in general, speaking about the UN, there was a question about the UN. Currently, the UN Security Council looks, well, it doesn't probably looks obsolete as I wanted to tell first, but it doesn't work because they cannot find a solution to any regional issue or global issue. Someone will just put a veto. The Russian position is that we need just to agree on some rules to continue to follow the UN Charter. My personal opinion is that something needs to be changed in the UN system at the moment, especially in the Security Council system. Something needs to be changed. More players should be there, actively playing as permanent members. India is one of them. And some probably rules need also to be changed. Otherwise, we will not find a way from this deadlock. Otherwise, the UN will once become absolutely unnecessary, as the League of Nations once became. You remember that the League of Nations existed until, I think, 1947, when it was absolutely forgotten by anyone. Even the UN already existed, but the League of Nations was there. There were people getting salaries. So we, instead of creating a totally new system, we should try at least to reform the current situation in the UN. However, if we don't succeed in that, a new infrastructure will inevitably be built, because the world cannot live in a situation where there is no stability in international relations. There is no stability at the moment, and it once will appear, just as it appeared after the World War II. The same with the Bretton Woods system. Well, definitely it needs to be there because it was logical when it started, but now it doesn't work because it's controlled by just one single country. If it's not controlled by a single country, if it's under control of a community of countries, it can exist further with the World Bank, with the World Trade Organization, with the IMF, anything. And the issues of spheres of influence, that was the greatest question. So I absolutely disagree with the term. It's a term coming from the 19th century. We don't use colors any longer for the world map. The colors, all colors are different. We don't have any spheres of influence anymore. We should find some way to forget this term, because otherwise it will go to a next deadlock, the spheres of influence. We should just find a solution to avoid this and to make it leave it in the past. Because we will never agree, and it will lead to future wars, regional wars, local conflicts, global wars, these spheres of influence. This is why Russia always says that no, we do not have any sphere of influence, but we just need an agreement on how we should treat this or that military issue, missile issue, territory issue, and so on. So this is definitely much more, I should say, complicated if we refuse this term, sphere of influence. The sphere of influence is a clear term, at least we understand it because it can be drawn on the map. But the current world is much more complicated than that, and we should not stay there, I'm absolutely sure. As for your other question, which is the starting with minor issues, that's what they do actually in BRICS, inside the Shanghai organization. They try to agree on, they have agreed already on various technological projects, ecological projects, various transportation initiatives. They created a bank of development in BRICS, and they are trying to create it now in Shanghai organization. They are very good cooperating in anti-terrorist exchange of information. So this is exactly what they're doing. They are trying to start with some minor issues where they will find a consensus, and then constantly raising the degree, getting to a more complicated issues. And what I described in my lecture, I think we will see it probably in a couple of decades from now. It's not tomorrow's thing. but we will eventually see it, I'm absolutely sure. There was another question, actually the last one, the Indian mediation in Ukraine. Well, in my opinion, India did not propose any kind of a plan. The Chinese once proposed a plan, but from the very beginning it was understood that the plan would not be accepted by the West, and it was not. If India, there was another I think proposal by China, Brazil, and somebody else. South Africa, probably, yes, thank you. And again, this kind of a mediation should be very, how do you say, it should be very careful because it includes superpowers. You cannot come to a superpower and say, I got a solution. Because they're superpowers. They think they know everything better than anyone else in the world. This is why it's very hard to come to, I don't know, China or Russia or India and say, well, we got a solution that you cannot invent, and we invented it. No, I think no way. No mediation will work here. They should sit down together, the leaders of the United States and Russia, and I think if they spend 24 hours in a closed room, they will get a decision. Just don't give them food. Thank you.
Speaker. I think the most important thing to take away from this very challenging lecture is that they must talk. I think this idea of cooperation among the powers, among the countries, must be talked about, and indeed these three countries have a historic role to talk about possibilities about global future. Now the real issue is about the principle. Now, see whether the dominant strategy of development and that strategy driving security policy and international politics creates certain framework which is based on dominance. So do you want a structure of dominance, a new structure of dominance, or a new global restructuring system? Because a new structure of dominance will be replacing old big powers with new big powers. We don't want that. We want indeed, as you emphasize, the UN principles of equality and mutual respect. And for that, you don't need just global rebalancing. You need global restructuring, democratization of world political order, pro-political economy, in economy, security, and culture and communications. So you can't have three countries or some 5 new monopolies of the world who really have a new world order based on their technological superiority, which is also their military superiority, and that drives the economy as well as military power. Now, therefore, there are two models here: global rebalancing and global restructuring. Global rebalancing is the language of the big powers, old big powers and the new big powers. Global restructuring is the language of those who want to continue the decolonization process. That was the Bandung message. They want the United Nations, which captured the post-Second World War spirit of equality, self-determination, and democratization of the world. Now, is the greater Eurasia vision going to restructure the world in a democratic way at all levels, in economy, technology, culture, as well as security arrangements? Small issues, yes, I think very important small issue agendas. They are not small issues, they are big issues. I think BRICS, after the first few big issue statements, the BRICS declaration goes on to all those very concrete dimensions of ecology, technological cooperation, including AI and university cooperation and so on. But what is it doing? Is it complementing the neoliberal world order dominated by the monopolies, technological monopolies, communication monopolies, and therefore military monopolies? And what India, China, Russia, Brazil are doing to have new monopolies to compete with the American or Western monopolies. That is not the world we want. We want India, China, Russia to break monopolies and democratize knowledge system, technology system, and have a new model of development which is sustainable. Not after polluting the world, you try to develop sustainable technology. No, you change the development strategy so that you promote sustainability, a new relationship between humans and nature. Therefore, I think we must continue to talk, but it should be about principles which have really governed our revolutions, our anti-colonial struggles, our people's movements, and in all our countries, Russia, India, China included, we have these voices being raised to have alternatives to neoliberal political, economic, and strategic order. Therefore, I think this challenge that you have posed is really a wonderful opportunity to advance our dialogue, to really restructure the world for a new world order. Thank you very much. Final words of thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Mohanty. With this, we come to the end of the 2025 Gargi and VP Dutt Memorial Lecture. We thank Professor Babaev for his invaluable insights and thought-provoking perspectives. We also thank Professor Mohanty for chairing this lecture. I would extend my heartfelt gratitude to ThePrint, who partnered with us for this event. We also thank the audience for their engagement and thoughtful questions. We'd like to announce that we are currently in the process of receiving applications for the ICS HYI Multi-Year Doctoral Fellowship in China Studies for the year 2025. We encourage you all to share the information with your colleagues, students, and friends. Have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you at the future events. Thank you for joining us today.